I was like Groundhog's Day. I was like Bill Murray, and it felt like every quarter I would attempt to do something, and by the end of like 2 to 3 months, it would end in complete chaos. So that was 2023. I felt like I spun my wheels for 12 months. And then here I sit in 2024. Oh, I was an Unbound alum, and here I am a successful business owner. But every single year since that point, something had gone along the way. And so that's about as transparent as I can get is in terms of what success really looks like along the way.
Welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And today we have a really fun conversation with John Skomski. John is a family member. Not really. We're not related to him, but he is an alum of the Unbound program. He is somebody that we care a lot for, and now we're just super proud of. Honestly, we've always been proud of John, and so it's not like a new thing. But there's lots of cool stories that he shares with us and a lot of fun stuff that goes through. And so this is a fun conversation, but it's also a conversation full of a lot of wisdom and some hard-earned and hard-won knowledge. So we're looking forward to sharing with you. David, any thoughts that you have before we get started with this conversation?
Yeah, I would just say if you're listening to this, and especially if you are struggling with failure, if you are facing the possibility of risking failure, or if you have experienced a major failure that you're trying to figure out how to deal with, I think that this podcast will be very encouraging because there's a lot of very honest and transparent conversation around that topic specifically. So if that's you right now, listen in.
If you ever thought that, man, that person looks like they just rode a rocket ship of success and wouldn't it be cool to be them, listen to this conversation. John Skomski. John, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast, but I don't have to welcome you to Unbound, as it is delightful to have John here. He is a Unbound alum, so that's mostly good for us at this point. Like, that just makes us look better to say, hey, that guy's one of ours. And so there's all kinds of cool stuff that we could talk about there. But in addition to that, John is a very successful financial advisor. There's any of you who know anything about that world is that you have to be basically an entrepreneur and a business owner of a sense to make that work to begin with. But then it's gone on from that to launch a bit of a business doing some speaking and some writing. And he is the host and founder and I guess head star of the Think, Live, Repeat podcast, which if you haven't listened to it, you should definitely make sure that you go over there, subscribe, and listen because he has awesome guests and it's a high energy, high production show that's really fantastic. And then we just know John is somebody who has a lot of good things to say. Most recently, David and I got to hear him say those things at Basecamp, and he was one of our star keynote presenters there. Made a big hit with us and our students. And hey, it's super fun to have you in the podcast. So welcome, John.
What a pump. You know what? I'm honored. I feel like maybe half of that is true, but I'll accept it. It's definitely awesome to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while, making it happen. And yeah, I mean, we go way back. So this is really cool. We've got when I host the podcast, I'm normally, interacting with people for the first time, or at least first time. And this is, old friends. So very cool. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so John and I have some fun times together. John was a student way back in the early days of the program, not long after I started working for the company, and one of the first students that I met. And so I think we met in Rochester when I was doing a convention there. And then afterwards, John came and assisted me at several conventions, like, 3, 4, or 5, I don't know. So we traveled around and did some time on the road together, had some fun with that. And then he worked as a coach in our early precursor to our high school programs and did that for a while. So we were colleagues. And so we had some time on the road, some time in hotel rooms, some time over meals, and then I have kept up through the years and then a lot more recently. And it's been super fun to see some of the stuff that you're doing. So, that's kind of my quick biographical sketch of what I know. But tell us a little bit about how you got to where you came from and how you got to where you are now, John.
Yeah, well, I credit Unbound and the iteration that I experienced was College Plus. Again, those early days, getting me to the point where I'm able to do what I'm doing today and the mindsets that I've built along the way. So, earned my degree through accelerated distance learning online, Thomas Edison State University, then, State College. And so my degree got like more prestigious after the fact, which is kind of cool. I got a note like 5 years ago and they're like, hey,
It's
we're
like
a
a value
university.
add.
Yeah, we're like a university now. I'm like, oh, how cool is that? But yeah, no, so it's interesting. And I'm not just saying this because, you're on the pod, Jonathan, but it's been interesting because at various points along the way, there are people in your life that are placed there that at strategic points will speak wisdom or some insight or offer an opportunity. And you've definitely been one of those people. And so early on, helping me get a job as a coach and then taking me on the road, doing those things, early sales skills that at that point I really didn't have any concept of I guess, what I was building, right? Like I knew what I was doing, but I had no real like, okay, this is actually going to be a usable skill 5, 10, 15 years, and here's how I'm going to do it. And so, there's been times where maybe it's even been a year or two, like in between, where we haven't spoken. And then at various points, whether career based, whether, life, faith, family, various points, I'd reach out and it just seems like you had such an incredible understanding of where I was at. And you'd hit me with some angle, like, and it wasn't some bizarre thing. It was just something I hadn't considered. And it was like, that's it. This is incredible. So I consider it an honor to have had you walk alongside me and at various critical junctures, speaking, into my life, giving me that insight. And so, early on after College Plus, basically was like, okay, getting married, and I got to take this nice shiny business degree and do something else with it, and spent a few months. That was actually more than that. It was like 6-9 months looking for like the right fit and all that, and landed at a financial planning firm and started as a planning coordinator, which is like, think of a paralegal for an attorney. It's like that for financial planners. Did that for a couple years, got licensed. In the third year, kind of quasi supported and worked with clients. And then in 2017, so yeah, 7 years, launched my practice. Still at that firm, but as a sole proprietor now, and we kind of just all go under the same roof, share employee and office space and that. So I think the skills of self-starting, of thinking outside of the box, definitely, and just this, I don't know. And the funny thing is I wasn't even looking for it. I was looking for something. I didn't know what I was looking for. In some ways, I'd argue I'm still looking for that thing. But as I went along, I would just take the opportunities, and I feel like, I don't know, Unbound, the early iteration of that, helped me understand to not just think, okay, there's A and B. I talk about in my keynote, there's always a third door. Mm-hmm. And I think that third door thinking, like, okay, do you want to do A or B? Do you want to go to college or not go to college? And if you go to college, it's only this. It's like, oh, maybe there's this. And it doesn't matter if it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or fill in the blank, whoever it happens to be. Most of those people are third door thinkers. They're looking at it from another angle, and they're not just going to accept the narrative of, A or B. And I'm not saying I've perfected that, but I have been open to things that I think a lot of people might have missed. And I credit that with, training along the way. So yeah, I have the practice. I do that. And then what I do now, a couple of years back, I launched a podcast and kind of a personal development brand, which has morphed into some speaking and writing. We can get into all that, but that's, had family, kids along the way, all that fun stuff. And here I sit.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks. I love that phrase, third door thinking. I'm gonna have to remember to credit you for that, and then steal it after I use it for a while. Just to,
you can do it, yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think that's a fantastic phrase. And David, I want you to note that I got a little bit of credit for being the words of wisdom guy there for a second. Normally that's David's gig, and so that was got a nice crossover. But
okay, except yours are like actual, legitimately helpful words of wisdom. Mine are sarcastic things that make people laugh on the internet. All right,
well,
there you go.
Very clear. Say it wasn't sarcastic, right? So,
no, I didn't specify. All of the above, just wisdom.
There's a really fun part though, John, and it's worth for the listeners to hear this. So yeah, I got privileged to be at a couple spots, and a couple times it got worked out in just a way that John called me right after the thing he was asking about we just figured out, So it was like there's a nice timing thing, and so it wasn't so much the wisdom. It was like, oh, I think we just did that, or sometimes like, oh, we just screwed that up. Let me give you a better plan.
Yeah.
But what was really neat about that is that sure, that happened a couple of times, but when that happens and you're willing to do that, it almost always comes full circle. That's not the reason to do it. But recently, we might say that we're almost reversed. John has connected us to people and provided opportunities for us and has come and spoken at our events. And those things have been priceless in terms of the things that he's been able to share, the perspectives and connections. And so it's certainly one of those really cool things where, that we had an opportunity to serve, but then that opportunity was reversed. And now in so many ways, John has been a blessing to us and has been able to do some cool things. I say us, Unbound, me personally as well. And so, well, John, let's talk about some of that, because I think you and I have gone through this a couple of times and we've talked about it. And in some ways it's a little trendy to talk about this now, but I still think there is, especially in a social media world, there's this idea that success is kind of this unbroken chain of victories. And all three of us sitting here would just smile and laugh and shake our heads if somebody said that was the case.
Yeah.
But from the outside, you weren't trying to do this, you weren't trying to sanitize it in any way, but we'd say, oh, great. So you went to a different kind of educational process. You got a degree that had value added afterwards. You got a third door thinker. So you launched you started working for a financial advising firm. Then you grew that, you became your own thing. That sounds very successful. And then that was going so swimmingly well, and you were so awesome at it that you just transitioned right over and started doing personal productivity and personal growth and development. And now you got this podcast and you're a speaker. And wow, look at this guy. I wish I could be like him.
Yeah.
What a rocket
too.
ship of success.
I want to be like that guy too. If you ever meet him, let me know. I want to get introduced to him.
and so look, there's we quote this line from Andy Andrews a lot, was that's the truth. Well, excuse me, that's true, but it's not the truth.
Right.
In other words, everything about what we just said is absolutely true. There's nothing false about that. There's no, he's not inflating anything. He's not selling you stuff that doesn't happen, but that's not the full truth. And so you talked about this a little bit at base camp. I think it's a thing that even at this point in my life, I will look at somebody else and think, oh man, I wish it'd been just easy like that person. And it's almost never the story, right? Or some people, just recently I had a phone call and somebody said, oh, wow, and basically it was a verse of, you seem to have it all together. And I'm just listening to this going, who's this guy talking to? Like, like earlier that morning, I was just beating my head against the wall going, why can't I figure stuff out?
Right.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's an important and ultimately a hope-filled journey. So.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's what I find value most when I'm listening to a podcast or a book or whatever. I want to hear what didn't work. Because honestly,
how'd that just screw up?
Yeah, how did this guy screw it up, and what did he learn from it, right? And so this is this perfect segue into this, because this is I would say nothing is further from the truth. I actually love the dichotomy that we kind of unintentionally created here, because what you just heard me say like 5 minutes ago, like you said, all true. Right. And if you were to meet me in a hallway, or you're going to talk, hey, what do you do? Hey, what do you do? That's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you, this is my life. Here's what I'm doing. And yeah, what you don't see in that 5-minute recap is the literal blood, sweat, and tears along the way, the constant failures at various levels and degrees, right up until like at the time of this recording here in March, like even present time working through things. I'm wearing a t-shirt, which maybe we'll talk about, something that was an abysmal failure, at least in its current iteration. Yet I still wear the t-shirt, namely because I still have like freaking 40 of them laying around my house because nobody wanted them. But anyways, we'll get there. So yeah, so failure, my wife often asks this. She's awesome. She'll be like, and it's usually like around January, I'll be like, do you think we'll ever have a normal year? And at this point, I should be fair. She hasn't asked that in recent years. I think she's like, we will never have a normal year. Like literally, 2015 and 2016, we were doing some family stuff. 16, we had our first child. 17, I launched the business, cut salary, went completely on production. So like, and we just bought our house. So baby, new house, cut salary. And it's like, okay, hope I sink or swim. 2018, what was 2018? Oh, 2018 was, there's an advisor our firm brought on, and it turns out within a few weeks of him joining and bringing his clients over that he was pending felony investigation for substance abuse and things you do while you're under that influence. So he goes to jail. And so 2018 was this whole mess of his clients suddenly like in our laps, but like not knowing who we are because he just moved over, and then him going through, legal proceedings, then bounces to another less reputable firm who took him on during that time to take over his clients before he went to prison, which he did go to prison. And me getting on the phone 7 days a week saying, hey, hi, I'm John. I'm in my 20s. I'm actually really knowledgeable. And your advisor, got stoned and touched his, and so and so and so. But you should really, I'm not making this up. And that was the most stressful experience of my life. And then 2019 rolls around and we decide to change broker dealers. Every single account gets repapered. Oh, by the way, you can't do that with the firm we were at. You can't let them know. So it's cloak and dagger. So no lie, the night before we hand in our resignation to the broker, we're pulling up with a moving truck under darkness. Like we wait till dark. We're carrying the furniture out the office door. And there's the broader broker dealer has an office across the hall. And there were like a couple guys who we knew who were like walking out and seen us carrying our furniture out. And like, we literally saw one pick up his like cell phone to call. We're like, oh no, they're going to find out. Like, so that was extremely stressful because I'm like, this is my livelihood. I just got a little traction. Now we're completely upending it and giving it the opportunity to, lose clients. That was 2019. Then 2020 hits. Now, yes, that was COVID and all of that. In my case, within the period of a week, my wife could have died, had a very severe anaphylactic shock reaction to something, and then the drugs got screwed up in paralysis. It was traumatic. Markets were cascading because of COVID. So my income was going way down. And then I get hospitalized within a week of my wife's second hospitalization, thinking I'm dying of a heart attack, like shaking, sweating, like feeling like I'm going to pass out, the whole 9 yards. Turns out it's a panic attack. Oh gosh, that's not a panic attack. I'm actually feeling like I'm dying. This can't be a panic attack. It's like, oh, that's why they call it a panic attack, because you feel like you're dying, right? Like that's literally the definition. And so 2020 and 2021, we're literally relearning how to live, because eating, sleeping, driving, everything became a challenge for me. And I had to relearn how to operate in this new reality of thinking I was going to die 7 different ways from 7 different things. And then also just, fear of all these things and people and whatever. And then, so that was like 2020 and 2021, failed buyouts. You want to talk about failure? The partner I was with at our firm, who was there when I started, I was kind of like the heir apparent to buy her practice when she retires. And we started 2022, put a ton of time into it. Long story short, it was this slow, painful, anger, shouting match, crying on all parties in our firm, walking from the table, legal fees, all this. At the end of the day, October 31st, 2022, I walked on the eve, basically, of the deal being signed, after having spent thousands of dollars, and just because I could not wrap my head around the risks that I was taking on and the deals that the terms had changed, all these things. And boom, there's a year of my life. And I'm talking like not sleeping, not eating, like I'm dreaming about discussions we're having in my head. That was 2022. And then 2023 rolls around and I'm like, okay, this is finally going to be the normal year. And from a family perspective, it was good. Like no big traumatic things, but it felt like I was like Groundhog's Day. I was like Bill Murray, and it felt like every quarter I would attempt to do something, and by the end of like 2 to 3 months, it would end in complete in like chaos. It would just be like wouldn't exist. So that was 2023. I felt like I spun my wheels for 12 months. And then here I sit in 2024. So that was the sexy version you heard. Oh, I was an Unbound alum, and here I am, a successful business owner. But every single year since that point, something had gone along the way. And so that's about as transparent as I can get, is in terms of what success really looks like along the way. There you go.
Well, I think, thanks so much for sharing that, because that's a lot. I mean, that's like basically saying, oh, by the way, I'm not as cool as it looks like, and there's all these struggles that came behind it. But I think the reason that's so important to share is that, in my opinion, it makes you look cooler, because ultimately that's the point. Because look, the first part wasn't untrue. In other words, you have to hear both. It's not like John's like, hey, my life has been a total struggle, an absolute agony from the time that I was, in high school forward, and all I've done is just completely smash my head against the wall. He's saying, yeah, that was a part of it. Like I put in the blood, sweat, and tears were real. On the other hand, I just told you about all the success that I had. I'm a third door thinker. That's allowed me to have the resilience, the ability to maneuver my way through some of these things. I've been able to accomplish success here. I've been able to weather these storms. I've been able to do those things. And I'm sitting where I am now with all the stuff that we said at the beginning being true. Those things are both at the same time and ingredients to where I am now. And I think if you're listening to this, especially if you're a young person listening to this, understand that's not, there are no normal years. And to some extent, you don't want them. John, my wife, has said the same thing. She's, occasionally things just get a hand. And I say, well, look, we do have the option to change. Like we could sell the house, move, do something different, shift jobs, do all this kinds of stuff. And every time we do that, we're like, well, boy, that sounds thoroughly boring. Like, why would we?
You're right.
I mean? So, but if you're going to have the excitement, you're going to have the chaos. If you're going to have success, you're going to have failure. And if you're going to live a life that looks exciting from the outside, you're going to have to put up with just raw screaming terror on the inside occasionally. And those things come together. And I just don't know. I'm to the point that if somebody tells you they acted differently, question their integrity a little bit.
I would agree.
There might be some substance abuse involved.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Really yeah. And I would agree. And after having, I'm up to like 80 episodes on my podcast, talking with everybody from, New York Times bestselling authors to my peers and everyone in between. And they're transparent. Like what you see is not what you get. And again, it's just because that's the way life is, right? And I mean, you and I know this because we've talked about it offline. What probably my favorite, and no offense to my other guests, but like I had started from day one wanting John Acuff on the podcast, and amazingly that happened. But even he talked about like he kind of like wandered in his 30s, wandered in his 20s, wanders in 30s, wasted, just started getting traction in his 30s. And then it wasn't until like 40s. And now in his mind, his narrative that he has to overcome is I'm showing up. I don't want to be late to my 50s. Like as I'm rounding out the 40s and looking at 50s, I don't want to be late. And it's like somebody like that, like how many New York Times bestselling authors, like he makes how much per keynote and he's still worked through these things, and he had years where he felt like he completely, like missed it. And so as you start to talk to people who do look like from the outside have achieved like eminently high levels of success and influence and whatever, and you're like, oh wait, like I experienced that. Like then you start to see that there is, well, you start to see a couple of things. Number one, social media is a bunch of you know what, like this whole image that we curate so carefully. And number two, we're all alike, and it's those who are open with it. I think that's what people resonate with, and I'm learning that it's like, okay, you got to be humble, you got to kind of look like an idiot, but if that connects and I can help somebody, then you put purpose to the pain, and then they get to bend the learning curve in their favor, and just like someone did for me. So I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, the internet is an odd thing because on one hand, social media and that gives us this very curated life. And so you have all these people or influencers, what they call themselves, and they present this picture to the world that looks so perfect.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, the internet gives us this really deep access to people, including things like this podcast, where you have a lot of ways to reach your audience, and people who do well are often people who are authentic. Because deep down inside, none of us really believe that there's an ability to be perfect all the time. The tragedy for me is that people may not believe that, and yet they still aspire to it.
Yeah.
So in other words, there is something about, I realize that this is probably not true, and yet I would really like it to be, so I'm going to live my life as if it is. And to some extent, it can be. I mean, there's people that have unusual early success or something, but there's always a failure part of it. So there's always an aspect where failure comes back around. And then the tragedy happens is that when failure hits those people, it's often bigger and much more shattering than it would be for those who think, oh, yeah, there's always going to be some struggle. I think some of the people that I've met in life that have had the hardest times, the people that had a lot of early success followed by a late failure. And the late failure was a perfectly ordinary failure, but it was the first failure. And so therefore the stakes were higher and the impact was often shattering. And there's an interesting converse thing here where if you have some early failure, you're actually probably set up better for long-term success because you build some of that resiliency in early. And so there's an interesting quandary there. I tell a story where, I interviewed in my job as a director of admissions. I used to hire a lot of people, and I interviewed lots and lots and lots of people. And when you do an interview, you'd say, tell me, what are some of your weaknesses?
Yeah.
And people would say, or what your biggest mistake at work? What was the biggest failure you ever had? And people would sit there and they'd say, well, I think some of my failures is I work too hard.
Yeah. I care too much.
Yeah, I care too much. I get a little overcommitted. And people laugh about that, but I mean, I'm telling you, like 8 out of 10 candidates would sit there and say that. And you just want to scream and say, get out of this room. Like, I mean, don't even talk to me. And so I tell people, I said, if you reverse that and you were interviewing me and I would say, so what's your biggest failure? I said, well, that's easy. I got promoted too early to a position of authority in the company. I was the director of admissions. And one of the first things I did was I signed a contract with a company. And then the second year, we didn't need that company anymore. And then the company sent me a bill for $70,000. And I was like, I don't need you anymore. And they said, well, yeah, but if you read the fine print in the contract, this contract automatically renewed unless you notified us in writing within 30 days. And I was like, that can't possibly be true. And you know what? It's absolutely true because the lawyer wrote it, and that's exactly the way it works. And so now I had to walk across campus and tell my boss, who was a retired Marine Corps colonel, and they don't ever really retire, hey, boss, colonel,
Sir,
we're going to pay $70,000, sir. Yeah, we're going to pay $70,000 this year for something that we're not going to use. And I could distinctly remember every step across that campus and every emotion going through my head, all of which were really bad, and how fast my heart was racing. And I tell people, but if I told you that story, and then I finished up by saying, that's my worst mistake at work. And I can tell you that there are lots of mistakes I probably still need to make, but I will tell you one I will never make. I read contracts really, really well. And so people go, oh yeah. And because now instead of thinking, oh, that person's perfect, they go, oh, I relate to that person. And I have some sympathy for that person. And Boy, I'm glad that wasn't me, and I've never done anything that bad. And yeah, I don't believe that person's going to screw up a $70,000 contract. And there's that when I tell that story, people instinctively know that. But isn't it wild that our first reaction, and mine still occasionally, is that John, man, he just easy street, man. He just graduated from college, was like a rocket ship. He started being successful and never looked back. And boy, I wish I was him. And it's not bad to wish to look at your success, but it comes with a flip side. So
Oh, it does. Oh, it absolutely does. And I've seen that, and I still fall, prey to that. And because you want it to be true, you want
right,
that narrative of perfection or just, up and to the right success. And it's like, I gave a talk last year and I called it How to Be an Overnight Success in 10 to 15 years. And it was literally because we just, it's like the narrative. I did this, then I did this. Oh, by the way, there were 15 years in place. Like, but we forget that. So if I could say, and even, if I could say anything that like what I'm dealing, like what I'm living through or working on in my own life right now is understanding that, well, I just heard it today, actually. Again, we underestimate what we can do. No, check that. We overestimate what we can do in a year, and we vastly underestimate what we can do in 5, 10, or 15 years. And I think I've gotten to the point where I'm so afraid, again, that fear of failure, but this time it's a fear of failing to take an opportunity or fear of failing to reach my full potential or make as much money as I think I should or meet the right people and whatever. And so I've been like grabbing at the first thing and the shiny object. I mean, that was last year and even into the present, like this shiny object syndrome of, oh, this must be aligned. And if it's not really aligned, I'm going to find out a way to make it align. I will grab this thing, I will wrestle it into alignment, and then lo and behold, it's not aligned. And the outcome is nothing that you want it to be. And you're like, okay. And after 3, 4, 5 times of doing that and thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours, and you start to realize, okay, maybe I need to take a beat, pause, pray, think, and be more deliberate about steps instead of this quick, oh, I got to do this. Because again, it's a fear of failure. It's just it's not like, oh, what if it doesn't work out? It's just like, oh, what if I miss it? But you're better off being more deliberate along the way. So I don't know where that leads in the juncture of the conversation, but that's been on my mind, like real time going through things as a kind of a key thing that I'm learning and realizing as I jump the gun a lot.
Well, the part that makes me think of too is the fact that I see so many people that are kind of in our generation see like adopting, and I think this is a problem for pretty much every generation, that adopting your success or failure as part of your identity and just
Mm,
seeing how well or how poorly you are doing at specific things as measures of your value and your sense of worth as an individual, which is incredibly unhealthy because like we've talked about, failure is an inevitable part of life, and
yes.
if we let ourselves believe I have failed, therefore I am a failure, that like we're going to be paralyzed and we're going to go nowhere, and I think that's causing a lot of problems for us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talked about this at Unbound or at the base camp, right? Like passive failure. We think I can't fail if I don't try. That just means you failed right out of the gate. The only way you fail. I've seen a great graphic recently on Instagram. It was like two like targets, right? Like for target practice, you had one where shots were all over the place. Nothing was on target. And then you had one that was completely empty. And failure was the one that was completely empty. No shots taken, right? That's really the like one way to visualize that failure is just the not, just resigning yourself to wherever you're at. Equally, failure can work, and it's sneaky. Like failure can work its way into like just grabbing at whatever you see because you're concerned that you're going to miss something. So, I mean, what I find in life is that it's like, I don't know, I don't want to say I've given up on balance, but I'm more interested in harmony and consistency. And so like I find that like I'm like all over the road and I'm constantly having to course correct and make adjustments. Oh, I didn't spend enough time with my kids this past month. All right. So then I really do great with that. But then I start getting up with work and then suddenly I'm back. And so it's kind of like this. And then I start to, I beat myself up over that. And after a while, I started to realize, okay, like the idea is maybe you're swerving less and the swerves are, more like you're staying in the lines longer. But truly, isn't that what life's about? Like, it's not just like, oh my God, I just snorted cocaine and ended up in prison. Like that's not usually what happens. It's usually these small, slow things that when you don't correct, eventually you end up in the ditch. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? No, it was a bunch of small, deliberate decisions and lack of course corrections that brought them to that massive failure sort of position. And so I attempt to make my life about how do I course correct so that a year from now I don't end up completely flaming in a ditch because I just missed it. But again, that's not exciting. Nobody wants to talk about the little daily choices, the things we do consistently that everyone else does occasionally. Nobody wants to talk about that. They want to talk about the big, massive actions.
And the
Yeah.
big massive success, the things
Right.
that work. I think something I was thinking about today, I was walking and considering there's kind of three realities, and it's important that we live in all three almost simultaneously, or at least be aware of all three. So there's your present reality. And I think there's two ways that we swerve away from our present reality. And the first is things are going well and we fail to appreciate it.
Mm.
So there's some aspect that, and there's all kinds of research about this. And from a Christian point of view, there's all kinds of things that make this make sense. But, there's an act of daily worship where you are just grateful for, I have I injured myself in a weightlifting accident years and years ago. And so I have a back that occasionally can be thrown out. And man, when your back is out, nothing works. And so, but when your back is not out, you don't think about it, except for now I do, because I know the pain of really screwing it up. It's literally every day that I don't have a major back problem, which is happily the majority of my days. I'm just genuinely thankful. Like when I was walking in I'm just genuinely thankful to be walking and running, because there have been not thankfully long periods of time, but there have been periods of time when I couldn't do either of those things because I'd thrown my back out and had to wait till it healed. And that can be really frustrating. So this being able to appreciate what's in front of you. And then there's also this aspect of endurance where there are going to be tough times and you have to be able to say, this is to be endured and will not last forever. So you have to deal with present reality. But then you also have to deal with reality that's over the horizon that you have some impact on, meaning that your aspirations. So, John, your aspirations to buy the business, your aspirations to launch a podcast. I mean, the aspirations you have for this business is where it goes. Those things drive some of your present reality. So you have to live in this kind of imagined reality that what you aspire to be and aspire to do. And that could be better days ahead if you're in hard times, or it could, and often it's better days ahead when you're in good times. Sometimes you're in good times and it's having the wisdom to think about hard days ahead. I'm going to prepare now. I'm going to save money. I'm going to, I heat with wood. So, it's spring now. And so it's really tempting to just relax and enjoy spring, but it will be winter again. And now's a really good time to be cutting wood because it stinks to cut wood in July.
Yeah.
And then the final one, and this is the one I think most people don't think about, is that there's an invisible reality that is actually deeper and wider and wilder than any reality that we live in. And it's the one we don't see and we can't see. At the end of the day, we're too small to really impact the big things in life. And so there are forces outside of your control that will impact you for good or for ill that you just have to accept are not things that are under your control. And that your impact of what you do will have ripples that are far beyond what you can see. And there is an aspect of understanding that and reveling in the mystery of it that is essential for the other two to work. In other words, you have to become confident in, or you have to be comfortable with the mystery of the reality that you don't know in order to fully appreciate the reality that you live in and to be able to fully imagine the reality that you want to have happen. And that includes, and this was not just a rabbit trail, but that includes this understanding that failure is going to be part of that, right? There's going to be this mystery of failure that comes in, things that don't work in ways you didn't see, opportunities you didn't see, opportunities to redeem failure you didn't expect that ultimately are going to add up to the whole experience. And I think to understand that all of those are to be appreciated at some level, which is not to say that we're going to love every aspect of everything that happens, especially the failure parts, but that even when you fail, you're going to look and say, this is going to be, and maybe this is because if you have something to do with the podcast, it's like, at one hand, you're like, this really stunk. And the other hand, you're like, this is going to be a good episode. there's going to be a good story in here somewhere, So.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's even, and so from offline conversations, but the most recent failure that I'm looking to, and I did the postmortem. I'm still doing the postmortem on to figure out exactly
It's
what.
not
Yeah,
funny yet.
no, yeah, it's starting. I'm starting to smirk because right over there you can't see it. There's a box of about 1,000 wristbands that people did not take, and there are. I mean, I pretty much just wear my own merch at this point because no one else is wearing it. And anyways, but I bought 1,400 wristbands because obviously it was going to be a raging success. No, that was simply just I went to a conference to do a showcase in the college, kind of the broader college market. And it was presented to me as this way of like, how do you not get, to someone who wants to do keynote, who wants to get on a stage and have an impact, have influence. It's like, you got hundreds of schools here. You got people from different parts of the military. You give your showcase, you're doing a 50-minute workshop, and boom, like you're going to walk away with 6 to 10 gigs easy. It's like, well, hey, I mean, I don't want to be in this market forever, but why not start? So I literally throw like November, December, and January everything into this. Like, again, literally thousands of dollars, hours, weekends, nights, build a website, get t-shirts designed, work with wristbands, like all this stuff. I show up and put up my booth. I got a 6-foot, you don't see this. This isn't funny yet. I have a 6-foot banner of me with my big old face on it and everything I'm doing and whatever. And that stays down, and I don't want to look at that. But anyway, so I set up the booth, and I'm talking to students, and I get some great engagement on Thursday. This was like a Thursday to Saturday. Amazing. Friday rolls around, I'm doing my showcase, and they have the first booking session where you sit there in a room, and all the people are there, all the agents are there, all the reps are there. They put your name and face on a screen, you raise your paddle, and at that time, and then they bid you, and then they go from there, and then you book, and you have a mini tour set up. So nobody did Friday morning, but I hadn't done my showcase. Okay, that's fine. I didn't expect anything. Do the showcase. Audience was like totally dead. I felt like I was saying things that I knew were funny because other people thought they were funny. Like it wasn't just me thinking, oh, they're kind of funny. And like nothing, no response. I'm like, well, this kind of sucks. And so the next booking session, Saturday morning. I had done my workshop. I show up in there, face on the screen, room full of people, nothing. Anyone want to do John Skomski, invest in, or anyone in a book? No, boom, nothing. Like, okay. Well, maybe I need to network more. So I go back. And they have exhibit halls in between all these things. And so the last one, by Saturday night, there was still one more booking session, but I was really getting into a very negative mindset. And I want you to understand the workshop, and I talked about this a little bit at base camp, but I had crafted the workshop to talk about failure and how to reframe failure and how to respond to failure and how failure is not the end. And so I literally just told people how to handle failure that morning. And I am so ticked off right now because I don't want to take my own advice. And it's almost like more ironic and more irritating that it's like, oh, I'm the guy on failure who just is completely failing. And so nothing. So by that night, it's like 8:00. And there's still one more session, and I start breaking down my booth. I was like, forget this. So I kind of like simplified it, and then like right at the end, I break the rest of it down. I'm like, forget this. Take my stuff to the car. I show up to the last booking session, and as expected, name up on the board. I was lucky because they split the alphabet in the middle, and I, for investing inward, was literally the first one on the mark. I walk in right at the back of the room because I don't want to look at other people because you just feel, I mean, you're not, but you feel like everyone's looking at you when your face is up on the screen. I go in there. Anyone for John Skomski investing inward? I look around, nothing. I'm like, you know what? I still had the hotel for one more night. I was in another state. I had a long drive. It's like, forget this. I packed the rest of the car, got in the car, and drove home. And I was in such an angry rage would probably be more accurate at that point. I wasn't even tired. Like I just fueled by rage the whole way home. Got home at like 3 a.m. And that was a few weeks ago now. I think the first 2 weeks, you talked about, David, with the identity. Like the first thing, my first stage of grief was, okay, what's wrong with me? Because I had a great time at base camp. That felt great. But there had been a couple other where the audiences weren't perfectly aligned, nor was it here. And I just didn't get a good feedback. So I'm like, am I a good speaker? Should I even be doing this? What's my problem? Then ground 2 was like, obviously, like this was just a big waste of time, and why should I bother doing it? And so I went through all these various stages, and I'm at this point now where I'm able to realize this is going to be a killer story in a keynote one day, because it is, I mean, the guy who failed at talking about failure, I mean, I don't think you get any more transparent than that. And I'm going to have pictures of the boxes of all the wristbands and all the t-shirts laying here and the stupid 6-foot banner of me. And so I'm at this point where I'm trying to make purpose of it now. That's where I'm at. But where I see it, I mean, that's literally a firsthand story of failure right out of the gate. And so I look at that and I said, so there you go. There's there's a story. And I'm still talking with people, figuring out where I'm going next, how to respond to this. But it was painful. And it gave me a perspective. And then I was thinking back to what I talked to all the students at a month ago. And I'm like, I have such a better understanding of failure now. And I'm thinking some of the things I said, was that really empathetic? Like, I didn't want to do that as I was going through failure. And so now I'm like kind of going through like, okay, maybe I should tweak this. And so it's been very beneficial, but obviously very painful. So there you go.
So what I heard from that is that so look, I have a little bit of more objectivity. So I've listened to John speak, I've watched him work at audience, and so you've just heard him speak in this podcast. I've got no doubts about the long-term success here, which is fun for me to say because I don't have to move 1,000 wristbands out of my office. Okay, so but what
you
I'm
guys
saying,
want any? I can hook you up.
well, see, here's what I'm saying. I want y'all to listen because I'm guessing we're looking at John Acuff level performance here someday. And when that happens, there's going to be a 6-foot banner somewhere in a closet that somebody's going to claim that's going to be worth way more than John thinks it's worth right now. So I'm just saying, like, you should contact John now, get a Go Calm Yourself wristband, maybe snag a T-shirt, put them in a little Ziploc bag and put them in the back of the closet. And then, 10 years, 5 years down the road, you're going to be like, look, I got some of the original OG merch and it's going to be a big deal. And it's going to be, collector's items, and who knows, it's going to be an auction somewhere. So I'm just giving you this is the Unbound podcast where we do all kinds of content and investor tips. So that's my investor tip for the day. So
John,
go
all
listen
of
to
your
the podcast.
audience is going to be absolutely over the moon about it, and you are still going to cringe at it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you mentioned John Acuff, and one thing that did keep me going, there's a picture he posted a while ago, and there's him 15 years ago. He's in a hotel room, and he's sitting kind of like this, like with his head down, and he basically bought a ton of stickers, a ton of swag, a ton of Skittles, and he's going to do a book signing. It was after his first book, whatever, and basically one guy showed up, literally one guy. And he said, and he posted that picture like 15 years later. And he's like, I had my friend take it at that time because I knew at some point it wasn't going to be me. And I wanted to be able to say, okay, look at me now. Look at me here. Here's what happened. So in the back of my mind, I know these things, but there's nothing that makes it easier in the moment or the moments that follow. And part of it was the lesson was just, it's so like, I don't say grieve because it sounds like over like melodramatic, but like allow yourself to feel the negative emotions. Like stifling it and pretending it didn't exist is counterproductive, and I would even argue unhealthy. Like acknowledge it. I would say like marinate in it to a certain extent, and then be able to move on. But I that's also part of it is accepting that failure does suck and that it's okay to be unhappy with it and to feel negatively about it. As long as that doesn't become, there's a fine line where then that becomes the state of mind and then takes over. And then, it goes on from there. But yeah, it was an experience.
Well, John, thanks for sharing all those things. There's a lot of lessons to be learned there. There's a lot to be learned from that transparency. And I hope if you're listening to this I hope you do a couple of things. First of all, I hope you go listen to John's podcast. It's like Think, Live, Repeat. And so live, think, repeat. Think, live, repeat. Sorry,
think,
I
live,
got it right the
repeat.
first
You
time.
got it. You were right the first time. Yeah.
Think, live, repeat. I was like, sorry, I had to think about that, and then I had to repeat it. So I just wanted to get it in there so that everybody.
And you had to live in the middle.
Yeah.
So check that out. Worth every bit of your time. And so go over there. Maybe see if you can hit him up for some of that cool merch he's got sitting in his office. But thank you for all that you share with us and all that we can learn from it. And we're even more proud to claim you as an alum. And thanks for your time and for being on the Unbound podcast. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I had a blast. I'm so glad we got to make it happen. And I can't wait for the next event.
Look forward to it. All right, Dave. Well, I feel like I can't decide if I feel like running out and being successful at something or running out and failing something. So I have a great story. That last story, that's a pretty raw story. There's some really hard stuff there. And John smiled when he told it, but man, that's a tough thing. I've been in similar circumstances. And so I just hats off to him for so quickly being able to turn that, get some lessons out of it, and smile at it, even though I think it's a little bit of a grit your teeth smile still. But that was something to hear that and to see is the way he's used that and turned it around and is already using it as fuel for his next endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just so often we look at the next big thing in our lives and see that as like, okay, this is the crucial thing because we put so much time, so much effort, so a lot of the time, so much money into whatever this next big thing that we're looking to achieve and accomplish is. And if that thing doesn't turn out the way that we want, then just because we are solely focused, we have so much tunnel vision on that one thing, so often it just feels so crushing to us when if we have the opportunity, especially afterwards, to take a step back and go, actually, this is something that in the grand scheme of, 10 to 15 years from now, I love how he brought up that perspective consistently. This is going to be something that I think I can learn a lot of really helpful lessons from. And in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not nearly as big of a deal as I thought it was.
Yeah, and I think that's a great summary, David. And everybody's listening. Listen carefully to what David just said. There's not a lot of universals that we can really feel like we can hang our hat on this with telling you, but I think this is definitely one. And it's not just accomplishment failures. So listen carefully. What David just said applies to business, it applies to education, it applies to relationships. There are some of you who are listening to this who you had a crush on somebody, or maybe you dated somebody, and at the end that didn't work out. And right now, that just seems like your entire world just burned. And I'm not belittling that pain and that frustration. That's very real. But I'm also telling you that hang in there, endure. The part where I was talking there about, that's the reality now, but there's another reality over the horizon. And also understand that there will be things from that experience that will be really important to learn forward. Now, it's not one of those things where it's like, go out there and fail as much as you can so you can learn a bunch of cool stuff. No, it's like go out there and do the best that you can, attempt to be successful, but realize that some failure is going to come along with it. But when it does, there will always be things in that failure that are absolutely essential for your next thing that you're going to be successful at. And that's true for business, but it's also true relationally, and it's also true in other aspects as well. And I know I've gone through that, and I think it's important to hear that. And so if you're in that position, hang in there. These lessons will be applicable at some point. It won't always be as raw as it is right now, and that you'll find some success around the corner. And maybe like John, you'll be able to laugh at it and tell the story as you go along. So, well, as we finish up here, we just want to remind you about some of the programs that we do here in Unbound. And those programs range from our Navigate program, which is all about making decisions and actually learning the tools to equip you to deal with some of the stuff that we've been talking about in the show today. Our high school program, and John had a hand in that early on and was part of some of our early versions of our high school programs that we have used as going forward to learn and set up the ones that we run now. And then finally, of course, our Ascend program. And rather than talk to you about all those different programs, which we've done before, I just want to kind of reflect and say, John is the kind of people that we have in Unbound. And it's that kind of community, it's that connection. It's the opportunity to rub shoulders with young people who then go on and fail and succeed, and then ultimately come back and end up being the teachers. There's a whole lot of things that now I get to listen to John and go, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Tell me about that. That I call John for advice now and say, hey, help me with this, or you've done this, but I haven't. So can you help me learn? And that's what's cool about this community. That's what's cool about the way things work at Unbound, where you build these really close ties with people. And in John's example, years and years and years later, those ties not only are still there, they continue to get deeper. And I don't know that I can tell you anything else that is more exciting than that in terms of being involved with any of our programs at Unbound. And so when you join Unbound, you really are joining a family and a community that continues years and years and years after you've finished your last class and earned your last certificate from us. So as we close out, any final words, David?
Yeah. I think just on top of that, I would say something that a phrase that John used at the very beginning of the podcast was third door thinking. And I think that's something that we highly emphasize in Unbound, no matter what level or what kind of program that you end up in, is that we want to make sure that you're able to look ahead at life and the current reality and the future reality, and be able to see the fact not only that there is a third door, but that God is faithful in all of those things as well. And so just a reminder, if you want to check out any of our programs, you should visit our website. It is in the show notes below. It is beunbound.us. That is beunbound.us.
Well, until next time, practice your third door thinking and be unbound.